Oh, there's me, pre-COVID. Just get past that. So one of the first things that I think is really important is to figure out your why. Why do you want to do the podcast? Why do you think people would listen to it? Like, what need do you think there is? And that sort of becomes your value statement. I think that podcasts, just as much as anything else, need a value statement because you're trying to get your listeners time, and time is a lot more precious than money, I think, at this point. So once you figure out your why, we go into target audience. You may have identified your target audience already. I know that when I was looking at doing a podcast, I was thinking my target audience is probably people like me who listen to podcasts pretty regularly, are in AEC marketing, and want to just maybe expand their horizons a little bit. So knowing your target audience is going to help you figure out what sorts of topics you should cover. Your tone is going to be a lot different based on your audience. So major thing right alongside your vision statement or your why. Then we have style. A lot of people think that, you know, a podcast is a podcast. Well, are you going to be speaking on about yourself? Are you going to be interviewing people? Is it going to be two of you just going back and forth about a certain topic? It's going to be scripted. Some podcasts are scripted and it's a full production, and maybe they go less frequently. So figuring out what's going to work best is also going to determine sort of how you move forward with your podcast venture. If I'm just by myself, I'm not depending on other people to say yes, or, you know, I'm not depending on them to do my editing. If I am interviewing people, my entire schedule is based on everyone else, more or less. Episodes, episode length, frequency, day of the week, day of the month. Those are the sorts of things that you need to look at when you're thinking of your target audience, why you're doing this. If you're doing this as, you know, you just want someone to have a new idea, maybe that new idea isn't going to take 40 minutes. So I pulled this from the internet. You could probably find something different, but it seems, just based on what I've noticed with my own podcast, that these are pretty consistent and they're true for the most part. The ideal length of any episode is 22 minutes. Now, the reason for that is most new listeners will give your podcast about 15 minutes to see if they like it or not. So if they look down after 15 minutes and are like, geez, there's another 30 minutes to go, they might bail. If there's only like 5 minutes left, they might actually stick around till the end. So that's just something to keep into consideration. I've had 40-minute episodes. They don't tend to go as well unless it's like some crazy, insane speaker, which I have had one that was a success. The rest of them, around like 20 to 25 minutes, tend to do better. The ideal day of the week to publish is Tuesday. The note here is just that a lot of people tend to listen to podcasts towards the beginning of the week. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Tuesday. I publish mine on Wednesday, but it should just be at the start of the week instead of a Thursday or Friday, unless you're recapping something. So let's say one of my favorite podcasts is a recap of a certain show, and they can't do that recap until the show comes out. What if the show comes out on Thursday? Then, you know, you've got a Friday podcast, no big deal. Because that's your target audience. You're looking for people who are also watching this. So maybe if it's a conference recap, you don't have as much control over that if your conference is on a Wednesday. Just something to consider. The ideal frequency is weekly, and I sort of figured this one out myself as well through trial and error, because I had bi-weekly podcasts, and I was thinking this is perfect because then it's easier for me to keep up with. But I had a backlog of speakers and interviews, and I started getting the people that I had spoken with reach back out to me and say, did you not like our episode? Did I do something wrong? Should we re-record? Because it was 2 months before I ever got to publish their episode instead of 2 weeks. So also something to consider. I think weekly basis is also easier for you to get latched on to a topic or an idea or people. Equipment. I don't think I need to go into this too much with the crowd that we've got, but I'll just touch on it real quick. This is when you want to start to look at your budget. So if you have a $100 budget, you're not going to get a $200 mic. And the truth is, there are excellent options at every single price range. I got my Yeti speaker refurbished for like $70, works perfect. And I got my headphones for $40. So trying to figure out what your budget is and making everything fit into it is probably the way to go when you're trying to pick equipment. I think that's all I needed to tackle there. Hosting sites, that's another element when you're just getting started. That is also where the budget is going to help you determine where you want to host. And hosting is basically you just upload your audio to a certain site and it disperses to all the major platforms for you, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I know there's a few others. So you want to look at cost price per month, and I would just average that out to what it is per year. I look at everything with budgeting per year, so you know what you're actually going to be landed with. And then the stats that you want. If your target audience is females in their mid-20s in Alaska, then you want to know if you're actually hitting that audience. And Spotify has really cool stats, but they only release it to certain hosting sites. So you have to be clever about which hosting site you want based on the stats that they provide you, either free of charge or included in your overall subscription. I will say there are some excellent platforms that you don't have to pay anything for, and there are some you have to pay a lot for that shouldn't really charge you that much. So do your due diligence and figure out what's actually going to work based on what you want. Don't just say, this one is $25 a month, so it must be better. Not true. Editing software, there's also a ton here. And again, make sure it falls into your budget. I think in the AEC industry, we're really lucky that we have Adobe for the most part. Most of us have InDesign, Photoshop. Another great Adobe application is Audition, and that's what I use. It lets me see when a certain word starts and ends. So I can cut out an if I need to, and I can see the full progression of that one sound, and then I can chop it. I love Audition, but that's because I don't have to pay for it. It's included in what my company provides me. So there are free editing tools. In the end, one isn't necessarily better than the other. It's just like the degree to which you want to edit. If you want to just record and post, totally cool. There's a bunch of podcasts that do that. I'm a little bit more sensitive, so I like taking out I like taking out weird breaths because I notice those things when I listen to podcasts. So it's more of a personal preference. Whatever works best for you is what you should do when it comes to editing software, because this is what's going to take up the majority of your time. Promotion, also something to consider. I promote on Instagram and LinkedIn. Those are the two that I've seen the greatest engagement with. LinkedIn by far surpassing Instagram. So I got my logo. I have headers because the hosting platform that I use has you put in a header when you upload a certain episode, which is helpful. It looks really cool when you look at the website. And then the promo icon. So I post just this icon on the AEC Marketeer LinkedIn page. I created a separate business page for it so that my speakers can also promote themselves, which in the end is what I want. I want to make my speakers look good. I want to give them the exposure that they deserve. So this is one way that I can sort of pay it forward, but also I reap the benefits as well. I'm leveraging their network as well as my own. That's just like a quick and dirty run through. Do you guys have any questions? We can sort of circle back to the ones that you mentioned at the beginning. If you could just remind me what they are.
One of them was about content and how you select it, although yours is more interview driven. I know at one point you had reached out about a specific topic asking who I know. So how did you come up with that topic, or what led you to needing a special person in that realm?
Yeah. So when I first started, I came up with a list of all the people that I wanted to talk to, whether it be because I just thought they were cool people, or if I knew that they knew about a certain topic that I wanted to talk about. So how I identify topics that I want to cover is I start to think, what would I have wanted to hear 5 years ago? What would I have wanted to hear 10 years ago? What do I want to hear now? What do I think might benefit someone that's 10 years farther along in their career than me, that I could maybe learn something and sort of share it with them as well? I'm trying to think of either bringing up old topics that sort of need a little zhuzhing up, or just new stuff that I want to know about, or people that I just really, really want to talk to. And sometimes those have led to the best discussions. It's a curiosity about people themselves. So that's what I use to guide my own podcast. Now, I'd want to understand the why of your podcast, and maybe we can brainstorm that a little bit.
We do like a lot of interviews with clients on projects, or maybe it's something that's unique. That we've also, the one podcast was with during the riot times, it was with, do you guys remember that one where Lori Trussell interviewed that gentleman who came, his story of how he got into construction and just stuff like that. I mean, some is special interest, some is project driven, some is brought on by like our clients, I think, come and ask us, or I want to talk about my project. And sometimes I don't listen to them all, I just see them come out.
Okay. I mean, I think the more you can tell the story of the person who your client is, that's what people really care about. They care about titles, but only to a certain extent. And I think anyone that's in a position of being able to make these big decisions probably has a really cool story that you could definitely capitalize on, whether it's with your firm or with your client. So there might be an opportunity to even provide some thought leadership within your own company. I'm sure you guys are doing that as well, but people want to know about people. Like we all love stories, and we know that in marketing, but we're telling stories about the project, or we're telling stories about our team, rather than this one individual whose favorite color is blue, who went to school for God knows what and ended up here. How? We don't know. So people like talking about themselves, and other people like hearing about it. That would be my biggest piece of advice. Project stuff is great if it's a good story, if it's like somehow engaging the community. It's really good for the client to be able to get their project out there and say that they've done something. But what I've found more often than not is when you're telling a person's story, you'll get a lot more traction. Does that answer the question?
Yep. And I don't know, ours for sure doesn't come out once a week. I think we have a lot of content and a lot of stories built up. It's just resources like Mary and Larissa who handle it. I think they have more to do than they know with. So I'm sure they'd like to get it out more often. Right. But if I recall, Amber and Lindsay, it's maybe a monthly thing, maybe 3 at the most every 3 weeks, which I'm sure they'd like to push it out more, but you know, unfortunately we aren't in it every day, but they, yeah, are part of our group. And she's got, like, Mary will co-host with a gentleman that we work with, and you know, they have a little tagline music that you just know is the podcast. It always starts it. And I mean, it's pretty good and well received, but yeah, does the content run out, or does it continue to be the same thing, like making it different?
I think different people and different projects will make it different. Everyone wants to hear about their own project too. So like,
Right.
even even if it's a similar project, it's a completely different set of people.
Well, and since we, you know, have our core market sectors, right? But we don't want everything about K through 12. I mean, that does not interests our healthcare clients, but they want to hear about whatever, the COVID thing that we did or whatever. So they are pretty good about circling the different market sectors, but you know, K through 12 gets kind of interesting. That has the most work, you know, how we pass referendums after the third try and stuff like that is, they've got to keep remembering to do, I guess.
Yeah, but I would say make sure that whatever time frame you're looking at, if it's monthly, make sure it's every month. People really value consistency, and make sure it's like, if it's the first Friday, make sure it's the first Friday every single time. It's hard to follow something when you don't know when that next episode is going to come out, and make it known when you can expect the next piece of information. Then you'll start to grow more of a following.
That is true. I was not a podcast. I didn't. And thank you, Courtney, for getting me hooked on Wondery, because I couldn't wait for Tuesday to come. I got on the Dr. Death series, but you wait for, when is it going to come? When is it going to come?
Yeah.
Insane. Season 2. I just have to put that out there.
They are really, it is, I mean, it's good. All of it is really good. So
I thought it was interesting that you talked about the music, because I definitely resonate with the Wondery intro music. I just have to plug it for a second because I'm a super fan. They sent me shirts and this really cool puzzle recently. Legit, it's like all my faves. So I'm totally a podcaster nerd. Anyway, so
yes.
side note, the music. Like, it's crazy that, you know, I had a podcast episode that was talking about technology, and it was AI dive into machine learning and artificial intelligence. And he was talking about how podcasting is taking us back to radio, like the days of us sitting around the radio. And when you lose the sense of sight, you have to tell a story with your words, and they have to be entertaining. So the music comes into that. And I'm curious, Keelan, like, how did you go through the process of copy editing rights and music? And like, how did you go through all of that process?
Yeah. I spent an entire weekend listening to music, and I was like, because they have all these different categories, and I knew I didn't want something like soft and delicate. I just wanted it to be energetic. I feel like marketers in this industry, we are type A people. We're not elevator music type people. So I was just like, I need something high energy that's not too grungy. So I listened to stock audio for about 8 hours. And I was like, I like rock. I think I like rocks. I just filtered by rock and found the perfect song. I bought that. So it was like $40 to buy full rights to, I think, 3 minutes of audio. So that's what you sort of have to figure out. What goes back to the tone. Like, what do you want the tone to be? I didn't want it to just be some pretty thing. I wanted to show that there is some substance to it.
I love that. Yeah, that's really good.
But it is a good point. Like, sound does bring us back to things almost the same way that smell does. Like, we're triggered by something being the same every single time. So that is powerful.
So on a typical podcast, how much time would you spend editing? Like, generally?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so it really depends on the speaker, because I edit out us, a lot of that stuff. I would say on average, it takes about 2 to 3 hours for me to edit, and I end up with like a 25-minute episode. I give my speakers license to start over if they don't like their answer, or if they just remembered something and want to tack it on. I have no problem with that. It's a little extra work on my end, but I care more about making them look good than I do about my back end time. So that's just a personal choice. It probably doesn't have to take that long.
And as one of your interviewees, I appreciate that.
You send your podcast out then through just social media? Does it go on a website? I mean, what is all the different platforms again, did you say?
Yeah, so I host on a website called Fireside. You need to host somewhere, and then that hosting site will disperse your podcast. You sort of give it the links, and every single time you upload, it'll shoot them out. And then separately, I promote on LinkedIn and Instagram. LinkedIn, by far, value for money. Sorry. She just wants to say hi.
Love it. So I have 2 questions for you. One is a 2-parter. So like, what has been your favorite interviewee, and why? And then what has been the one that like surprised you the most?
Gosh, that's hard.
Because you've had quite a few now, right? Like, I mean, you're in double digits.
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna sound so lame. I don't have a favorite. My most recent ones are always more fresh in my brain. So Deirdre Gilmore is probably one of my favorites, and she's also one of those that surprised me a lot. I had come to her with one idea, and we were both just having a day when we did our discovery call, and it just transformed the conversation. I was like, actually, this is the conversation that we need to be having. And it ended up being about living in your values and bravery. And I definitely didn't set out to have that conversation, but I'm glad I did. So that was definitely surprising. I think one of the bigger ones for me was getting a Harvard professor, and that was pretty early on, about negotiation. And I just found her so fascinating that I wanted to we do discovery calls. So I'll have a discovery call with whoever I want to interview first for anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes, where we sort of run through ideas and how we think the podcast episode should go, and then do the actual recording the next time. And I just wanted to sit there and talk with him for an hour. And I would have if I could. So,
which one is she? I was trying to look on the website too.
I think she's number 2, Maury Kelly.
Yeah, she's right before me. Okay, cool.
Negotiation, and especially what to do during this pandemic, with basically like maybe financial raises aren't going to be possible, but how can you still get recognized for the work that you are doing during this pandemic when you can't necessarily be compensated for it? And how you sort of earmark your success right now in a way that will help you out down the line when things are back to normal. and you're looking for the raise that you deserve or want.